Well, hello, everybody. This is Chris Decker. I'm back with a quick update here on the Nebraska employment situation. We had a data release from the Bureau of Labor Statistics on Friday, July 21st, and I wanted to share with you my thoughts on what that data release looked like and what the implications are for the state going forward. Um, so this should be a pretty short video because I'm going to try to focus attention on some of the most recent evidence. But I do think the report was very interesting on a variety of different fronts. Just as a quick reminder, I had called for a slowdown in employment growth in the state uh, in July, rather sizable one, and I want to share with you what the data currently shows from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I should emphasize it is preliminary data that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has provided through July. So with that in play, let's first talk about some of the weekly unemployment claims data and the continuing claims data. So here's an interesting pattern, and I hope you can see these figures reasonably well. Um, we are steadily moving back towards the long-term values for these initial claims. Long term in Nebraska, we're between 500 and 1,000 usually on average. We're working our way towards there, and I think pretty quickly. Similarly, in the Omaha area, about 5 to 600 or so unemployment claims on average in the city is usually where we're at. Now you see that little bump up there in early July, and you may recall if you've watched some of my previous videos, I had some very serious concerns about that with the COVID outbreaks in a lot of other states and a lot of other states having to slow down their phased reopenings. My concern was this could have an adverse impact indirectly on the state and the city. It looks like based on the data that's come through that the bump there was short-lived. That's good news for the economy, maybe not great news for me, but good news for the economy because back then I did revise my forecast of my initial claims upward to reflect that little historical uptick that we see. When that clearly wasn't happening and we started seeing these numbers come in very, very positively, as it were, still coming down in the latter part of July and early August, I decided to go back to my original forecast, the forecast that I generated way back in early May, to see how well my original forecast is actually tracking these most recent data. And I'm very pleased with the way that original forecast seems to be working. So I'm going back to that one for now. This is still something worth watching. And as a colleague of mine did point out, look, these numbers do bounce around a lot. They're going to. I do think that we've got one more week or so of August data to take a look at, and then early September, we could see some upticks coming through. And in fact, the latest release we had as of last Thursday, August 20th, we were up from the previous week. We're at about 3,189 in terms of initial claims. My original forecast has just under 3,000. So again, the forecast from back in May seems to be holding up really well. So I think that trend that reddish line is picking up is still a reasonable figure to form expectations around. I think we've got a little momentum going here. Similarly, for Omaha, we have a little bit of an uptick in the last observation. We're up a little bit from the previous week. We're at about 14,064 initial claims. The model originally had generated about 12,033 for this month back in May, and not too far off the mark. But again, there's no reason to believe that we won't have any kind of upticks. I think they'll be minor. One of the reasons why I think there'll be some upticks is that we did have the expiration of the CARES Act and the additional stimulus going into people who need that money. That did stop. I'm not terribly positive about the executive actions advanced by the White House. I simply don't believe that that's going to have much of a real impact at all going forward. If it is, it's going to be minimal, given everything I've read about it. So I might have more to say about that here shortly. In terms of those Nebraskans that are continuing on unemployment after their initial filings, some great news here. And again, this is why I think momentum is the story here, because even though there are some concerns, and those concerns were certainly in place back in July, so far so good. We're down to a little over 30,000 rather. Uh, Nebraskans continuing on unemployment. That generally means if you do have people who are finding work, it could be that some are leaving the labor force, but as a general observation in these times, my suspicion is that this is continuing a story where people are able to find jobs and come off unemployment. Now, at some point, the necessary questions have to start being asked about, okay, what kind of jobs are coming back? What are the wages that are being earned? Are these jobs as good as the jobs that were in place prior to the COVID outbreak? There's going to be a lot of research going forward on this, I am sure. But for right now, when we just look at these trends, this is something we should take as a positive. My model that I had originally generated back in June, in this case, had us just under 40,000. So I am over predicting currently. It's possible, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see an uptick over the next few weeks. But I'm going to hold to the trend and say that momentum is the story of the day here. If we can maintain that momentum, that's up to us. And again, I'll make my plea towards the end of this video regarding my feelings about that. So let's talk about this monthly jobs report for July. A couple of very interesting things, I think. First of all, do recall that I had forecast that July would be a decline, and I had actually forecast that we'd hit the brakes pretty hard, going from 18,000 jobs added or so in June down to well, I had actually predicted 3,500 jobs being added, but my thinking was anywhere from 3 to 5,000 would be a reasonable expectation for job growth for July. Well, July came in higher than expected in terms of job growth from my perspective. Interestingly enough, and this happens a lot, one of the pitfalls of trying to forecast monthly data from a BLS series is that data does get revised. And in this case, it got revised down for June. Much more than I thought would happen in terms of revisions. This is, over 1,000 jobs were taken out of the June initial report. That's pretty large for the state of Nebraska, that kind of revision. And it's possible that the BLS kind of loaded some of those jobs that took out of June into July. I will tell you right now, I think that the July number is going to get revised down. I think based on the first part of July and the weekly claims data that was coming in a lot higher in the early part of that month, I'm not sure that 14,000 job gain is going to hold up, but nonetheless, that's the current number, and that's what we're going to go with. Good news from the perspective of my forecast, qualitatively, we did have a slowdown. We didn't add as many jobs as we did the previous month. The great news for the economy is that the slowdown wasn't nearly as pronounced as I had thought it would be. So again, I keep on going back to the word momentum. Maybe we've got some momentum in this economy. But something very interesting happened with the metropolitan data. Again, I had called for a slowdown. I had called for jobs after being reported that June we added 7,700 jobs in the city. We probably get somewhere between 25 and 3,500 jobs back in the city. Interestingly enough, there were some dramatic revisions downward in the employment figures for June, much bigger than I've ever seen before. So much so that actually July reported growth in added jobs in July relative to June. And even when you compare May to June, June actually looks like a slowdown. So this was to me, this was a huge revision and started to suggest something to me that I haven't really been looking at too closely yet. But now I think it's time to start paying a little bit more attention to, since we saw this growth in jobs from 4,700 jobs added in June now to what they're currently reporting for July, that's an additional 7,800 jobs for July from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Caveat, sidebar, I think that 7,800 number is going to get revised down. But that said, if we go with that pattern, the question then starts becoming, from my perspective, if we're seeing a slowdown in the state overall and we're seeing an uptick in Omaha, is there a dichotomy brewing between two distinct economies? Do we have a tale of two economies going on in the state of Nebraska? I think generally it's been the case. Historically, urban areas have been growing better than a lot of the rural areas, and perhaps that's being intensified and depicted in some of the most recent data. What I have here is on the left, a figure of growth in jobs in Omaha and Lincoln together. So these are the two major metropolitan areas in the state. And you can kind of see that we've had a pretty stable recovery going on in May, June, and July. And by the way, if you include Lincoln and Omaha together, you have a slight down tick in between June and July. Probably means that Lincoln by itself probably didn't have as great a month as Omaha did. On the right is a figure where I'm just looking at jobs in Nebraska where I've taken out the jobs reported for Omaha and Lincoln. Now, caveat here, look, it is true. The Omaha metropolitan area, as reported by the BLS, does include Pottawatomie County and Mills County, and there are jobs there. So the straight up difference that I'm doing here with Nebraska less Omaha and Lincoln is a little bit skewed, but I still think it's reflective of what could be going on in the rural economy. Rural economy seemed to do very well in June. Started some slow growth back in May, had a great June, but doesn't seem to have kept that momentum. Now, 2,000 jobs in rural Nebraska is nothing to sneeze at, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely a slowdown. And maybe the slowdown in the state overall is being most felt in the rural areas. So one of the things that I had hypothesized back in May when I first started doing these videos was perhaps this COVID-driven recession will be one where the urban economy of Omaha will potentially weather the storm better than the rural economy will. The idea here is that Omaha and Lincoln too, we have very diversified economies. There are a lot of opportunities for the types of businesses that are being operated in Omaha, where remote work is quite possible. And you can transition and perhaps even grow as we have an economy going. If we hire, we can still hire with the idea of remote work in mind to still maintain the social distancing, etc. There may very well be limited opportunities in a lot of rural areas. A lot of rural areas are heavily dependent on one, maybe two industries. So if we have an outbreak at a meat processing plant in rural Nebraska, and that shuts down a meat processing plant, or we see 10-20% reduction in labor force availability, that's going to disrupt that supply chain, and that's going to make it difficult for farmers and ranchers to sell their livestock, etc., to those meat processing plants, and that's going to mean slower job growth, slower economic activity in those rural areas, because one industry that is disrupted from anything, such as COVID, is going to have ripple effects through those rural economies that are in some sense more exposed, more risky, or in terms of their structure. One sector can really generate a lot of damage to a rural economy. So there may be something here to start watching. And to the extent that there is any need for a stimulus, perhaps that stimulus is going to be seen as a greater source of relief to rural economies than perhaps an urban economy. Omaha, again, seems to be doing pretty well in terms of the data that's been reported. So this is something I'm going to be watching going forward, because I really think that there's a story brewing here. We'll see. Again, all I can really do is tell you I'm going to watch these numbers and see how things transpire over now the fall and into the winter. So let's go ahead and focus on the forecast and where I think things are going to be happening here in August and September and October. And again, I'm going to reemphasize what I've said before. I do think the July number may get revised down for both Nebraska and Omaha. That said, I think that for August, a forecast value of anywhere from 990 to 995,000 jobs is a reasonable forecast. The growth rate of 5,000 jobs is more of a reflection of the high growth rate that we had in July. If the July number comes down, I think we still may be at about just under a million jobs back in August, and I think we'll stay under a million jobs in September. I think we got some slow but steady growth with some momentum right now, especially if we do get an actual working stimulus that's actually meaningful sometime in September. I think that'll support some further growth, and will maintain some momentum. Could be back over a million jobs in the state of Nebraska by October. Still well below the 1,040,000 jobs, which where we peaked earlier this year in terms of jobs, but we're climbing, and I still think that by this time next year we'll be close to that peak. Probably the end of 2021 will be right where we were prior to the COVID hit back in February of 2020. Similar story for Omaha. I think it's slow and steady. I think that Omaha number could get revised down. I think we could end up with about 486,000 jobs in August, maybe give or take a couple of thousand or so. I think we stay under 500,000 jobs through October, but again, I think we're climbing back to our peak, and we may be climbing back to our peak of a little. Well, I think we were about 530, 540,000 jobs. At peak. We may get there sooner in Omaha than the state will get to its previous peak. I still think that there's reason to believe that. The rural economies may experience a little more sluggish growth. I think that's kind of the story. But again, all of this depends on maintaining the momentum that we've got. How do we do that? We need a workable and implementable stimulus program. The policy advanced by the White House, everything I've read has suggested that it's going to be very difficult to get any traction on this, to actually get money in the hands of people who need it in any reasonable amount of time. And the funds being drawn from are likely going to run out in a matter of months. And I just don't think that's viable policy. So Congress needs to get on its stick. And I do think that there's still reason to believe that labor demand is relatively weak. We still have way too many unemployed people chasing too few jobs. I don't believe we should worry about whether or not any kind of stimulus is going to discourage people from trying to find a job. I don't really think people are inclined to think that way, certainly not in Nebraska. The Nebraskan work ethic is pretty strong, and I think that very, very few concern should be levied at this idea that, oh, people are going to just collect unemployment and do nothing rather than trying to go out and find a job. I don't buy that argument. I think it's a silly argument, certainly in this current environment. I think we just need to maintain good contagion control habits. I've said it before, I'll say it again, because as I've preached before, we need to make sure that there's certainty in the marketplace so that consumers feel comfortable spending. They're not worried about losing their jobs, and businesses feel like customers are coming back so they can invest and they can hire more folks. So that's kind of where I'm at right now with this. My plan going forward, just so that you guys know, is to probably reduce the frequency with which I do these videos, because the school year's beginning and now I need to shift a lot of my attention towards my courses. So I'm hoping I can continue on a monthly basis to provide some of this information. I hope you're finding it valuable. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. I'm sure that by the time we get the August report sometime in late September, I'll be wanting to do one of these. So I sure hope you're enjoying and finding these valuable. And don't hesitate, again, to contact me if you have